Welcome back, Your Excellency. We're about to head into uncharted territory as we kick up your Excel skills with a cornucopia of charts. Let's learn! But before we begin, head over to our starter files folder at bit.ly/excel-starter-files, find the file name chartstarter, right-click, select download, save the file to your computer, then open this file in Excel, and let's head to the first tab in this workbook, which is Facebook data. And before we begin, let's save as, and we'll save a version of this workbook with the name Charts Video Lesson Workbook. Now the data we're looking at is actual regional revenue and user data from Facebook. And let's first work with the data in the first two columns. So let's select from A2 through B6. That'll give us the four regions Facebook uses when tracking the firm's business from a geographic perspective, as well as the revenue of those regions in millions of US dollars. Now, there are a lot of ways to create a chart from the data we just selected. The method we'll first use is to head over to the Insert tab, and over here on the right of the Insert ribbon, we see a group of icons for working with charts. So why don't we pull down Recommended Charts, and we see Excel offers a preview of different charts that it can build with one click. And it already shows what our values will look like in these different charts. We see the first one is known as a clustered column chart. The map really doesn't show us anything, but then there's a pie chart, a clustered bar chart, that's where the lines containing the chart values are horizontal. This last one is called a funnel chart. Why don't we head back to this first chart, the clustered column chart, click on that, and Excel plops a chart for us right on our worksheet. That sure was easy. The vertical axis in this chart represents the revenue dollar amount, and each bar represents a different region. Now notice, right after we create the chart this way, Excel drops us into the Chart Design ribbon. We see a list of predefined chart templates right here in the center for finding our clustered column charts. But for now, let's head back to the Insert tab, and if you decide you want a different chart with a chart still selected, you can pull down and select another chart type from the recommended chart selection. I'm going to select the clustered bar chart. Nice. Now let's take a look at the pie chart. Not a lot of descriptive info here, but we'll learn how to change that in a bit. And also know these icons over on the right represent different chart types, and each allows you to pull down and select versions of that chart type. This middle icon in the first column will allow us to select line charts. Let's pull down and look at these different options. Why don't we select the first option showing in the upper left, and we see a nice line chart. Now I'm going to head back to Recommended Charts and select our custom column chart, and do feel free to explore these other options on your own. Now sometimes some of the charts won't make a lot of sense with the data that you've selected, but one of the great things about Excel is you can always try out options, and if you don't get what you want, you can just undo and go back to what you had previously. Now, like most things in Excel, the elements in the chart are context sensitive. So if I right-click on the chart, I see a bunch of options that I can use to customize the chart, and to further refine options, just right-click on the specific area of the chart that you want to work with. So for example, let's right-click on the horizontal axis labels. These are the ones with the region names. Once we do that, we can tell this is the focus of our selection because there's a rectangle around that part of the chart, and there are little square selection handles in each corner. Now, one thing I'd like to do with this chart is flip the order of the regions, because my table starts with the US and Canada in the first row of the table, but since it's my largest column, I'd like that to be listed as the last column read left to right in my chart. Now I could sort the data in the worksheet, but if I want to leave my data alone, and I do, we can directly change the formatting of the axis that we selected by selecting Format Axis. And this brings up the Format Axis pane on the right. Now these panes tend to be a bit complicated, and some of the options aren't especially intuitive, so I really recommend that you explore this more on your own. But right now we see that there are tabs across the top, there are axis options and text options. Axis options are selected, and you see a row of icons. The one that looks like columns is selected, and the options are grouped with triangles to the left, and you can click on the triangle to show or hide options. These axis options are already open. The triangle is pointing down, so it shows you all the axis options. Now to change the order of the items in the axis, head down to this area that says Axis Position, and check Categories in Reverse Order, and that flips the regions so they now show the way we want. But look, this also moved the number labels in the vertical axis from the left side to the right side. So how do we get them back? Well, this part is not at all intuitive, so this is something that you probably want to commit to memory. If selecting categories in reverse order also flips your other axis, use the options above this, in this area labeled vertical axis crosses. Now, if you experiment with these options, you'll see, in our case, at maximum category will put the vertical axis back on the left-hand side. Now, there are other ways to achieve this, but none of them are especially intuitive, and this one that we just used is right in the pane where categories in reverse order is, and that's what caused our axis to flip from the left side to the right side. So if you remember, if categories in reverse order flips your other axis, just use these options in vertical axis crosses to reset your axis where you want it. Now, another thing we can do is we can show the value of the columns at the end of the columns themselves. And we can do that back in the Chart Design ribbon, so we'll click that, and then by selecting Add Chart Element. Now, this Add Chart Element pull down is a great first place to look to explore chart customization options. Now the one we want is under data labels, and we currently have none selected, but if we select inside end, this puts the exact revenue value of each column inside the column just before the end. It's a little tough to see because this is a dark font on a dark background, but they're in there. Now this is cool, but it would probably look better if it was outside the column. Well, we can do that pretty much the same way. Head back to Add Chart Element, select Data Labels again, but this time select Outside End. Looking good. Now these numbers have no formatting, and the reason for that is the original numbers on the worksheet have no formatting either. One way we can change this is to change the formatting of the numbers on the worksheet. So let's select this range of numbers, then head to the Home tab, click the $sign, and remove the decimals. And we see that the formats of both the data labels at the end of the columns, as well as the numbers in the vertical axis, are formatted. Now, if you don't want to change the numeric formatting in the original worksheet, we could just format the numbers that we select on the chart. So I'm going to remove the formatting we just added by pressing the Undo shortcut 3 times. That's Command-Z on the Mac, Control-Z on Windows. The formatting I just added goes away. And then I'll click on the data value numbers at the end of the columns. And look, all of these numbers are selected. Now, also notice that the pane over on the right now says Format Data Labels. Again, the options in the pane change to reflect whatever context you've selected. So we just clicked on Data Labels. That's why it says Format Data Labels. And under the label options down here, if we head down to number, we can click the triangle at the left to open up the options that are hidden inside. We see a category drop down. It currently has general selected, but we can pull down in here and select currency. We see a bunch of additional numeric format options, including a decimals box, which will also set to 0. And this looks great. And notice, this time we just formatted the data labels because those are the only numbers that we selected. We didn't add any formatting to the numbers in the vertical axis. In fact, now that we've got these nicely formatted data labels, the vertical axis doesn't really offer us much value, so we can delete it. Just select those numbers in the vertical axis and press the delete key. Want the vertical axis back? Our buddy, the Add Chart Element pull down will help out. So why don't we head back to the Chart Design tab, head over to Add Chart Element, select Axes, and Primary Axis Vertical. Now this adds back the vertical axis numbers, and know these options act like a toggle, so if we go back and select that very same option again, those numbers will go away again. Now you've also got quite a bit of control over the columns themselves, so why don't we click one column, it selects all the columns, it brings us to the Format Data Series pane on the right with this column icon selected and the rows across the top. But if you want a different column color, let's click on this paint bucket icon here on the top row. The fill and border options are exposed. Fill for the color inside the columns, border for its outline. Want red columns instead? Pull down the paint bucket icon next to color, select the color you want, and boom, you've just colored your columns, reddened up your revenues. You're like a regular Monet of money. Now I think there's too much white space between these columns. They look like they're social distancing, so let's bring them together. We can click back on the column icons on the top of the format pane on the right. This brings up series options for formatting the data series. And we have a slider for the gap width between the columns. You can slide that right or left, or you can enter a new value into this box. So I'm going to type in a 20 for 20%, press return, and we see the white space is now 20% of the width of the columns themselves. Now we can do even more to format these columns, including replacing the color with a picture that will resize to the column size. Now to demonstrate this, I'm going to add a European Union flag to the image inside the column for Europe. So first, we need a picture of the flag. So let's head over to the browser. We'll search for EU flag. I'll bring up the flag I want. I'll click it, and then I'll right-click and select Copy Image. Then I'll return to Excel, and Excel won't immediately allow me to paste this directly into the selected column yet, because the image on the clipboard isn't in the format that can be pasted into the column. So what I need to do is first click somewhere on the worksheet and paste the flag into the worksheet, and whoa, this is a really huge flag, so let me resize things. And once I've got this flag on the worksheet, this flag is in a format that Excel can use. So I'm going to click the flag again. I'm going to copy this flag with Command-C on the Mac or Control-C on Windows. By the way, once you do this, you can delete the image that you pasted on your worksheet. You won't need that anymore. And now if I click once, I select all of the columns. And if I paste the flag in here, it goes into all of the columns. But I just want it to go into the Europe column. So I'm going to double click to select just the Europe column. Then I'll press the keyboard shortcut to paste, Command-V on Mac, Control-V on Windows. And this looks like something you'd see in a newspaper or magazine article. Nice. And just to show you, if you go back and click on one column again, all the columns are selected. Press the keyboard shortcut to paste again. And all columns have the EU flag inside them. So that's a cool trick, but I'm going to go back to those red columns, so I'll press the undo keyboard shortcut twice, and I can also click on this flag and press the delete key to get rid of it. Let me zoom back in so I'm easier to see. Now we can also change the colors for the individual columns, so I'll start with the Europe column. Remember, click the column once and you've selected all the columns, but click a second time, you select just that one column, and with just the Europe column selected, I'm going to select a new color. That looks good. And why don't you go ahead and change the color in the remaining two columns as well? And now let's look at the chart title. Right now it's got the title from cell B2, and if I click on B2 and change the worksheet value to just revenue, when I press return, the chart title changes. That's good to know. Now I'll undo this change, and I'll also show you that you can instead link the title to another cell in your worksheet. So I'll click on the chart title to select it, then head to the formula bar, and I'll type in the equal sign, and then if I click on cell A1, now I've linked the chart title to that cell. When I press return, the title updates with the value that's in A1, and now this is dynamically linked to the worksheet so that if I change the value in A1, my chart title will change as well. But if I want to put static text directly into the title so that it won't change if the workbook is updated, I can just click to select the title, backspace over whatever was in there, and just type in the new text. And let's type in Facebook revenue. We can also press return to get a new line. You can have multiple lines in your chart title, and we'll write in parentheses in the second line in millions of US dollars. And now we can format this text in this box using any of the Excel text formatting options. So I can highlight the first line in the text box, head back to the home ribbon, increase the font size to 20 points. I can highlight the second line, decrease the font size to 12 points. I can click outside the chart and it will resize all of the chart elements to accommodate the last changes I made. Looking good. Now I can also click back on the chart title and try some other options. I can use the paint bucket and set the background color of this box to a nice Facebook blue. And I can use the option next to this to change the color of the font itself to white. I can even boldface this. I'm going to type Command B on Mac, Control B on Windows, which is the keyboard shortcut, so that I don't have to click the B on the home ribbon. The bold is looking good, and that's a chart Sheryl Sandberg herself would love. That's our first chart. Let's make some more. Now let's use the same data range and show different ways to represent the same data. So I'm going to make sure that I've selected A2 through B6. Then I'll head back to the Insert tab. I'll select Recommended Charts, and I'm going to choose this clustered bar chart. Then I'll reposition it on screen. Now be careful when you click to reposition. I just clicked on the inner part of the chart and just moved the inner rectangle with the bars themselves, not the entire chart. So I'll undo, then to make sure that I've clicked the chart, see how the white square selection handles on the edge of the whole chart indicate that the entire chart is selected. Then I can click the mouse when my cursor looks like an arrow in all four directions, and I can drag the chart to a new location. And you can also click and drag on the corners of your chart to resize them. I'll do that with the top chart. Notice that Excel automatically reformats the interface elements in the chart, the columns, the labels, the axes, so the chart looks its best, and I'll position and resize the bar chart just below the column chart. Now I think these bars would also look better with less white space between them. We've already learned how to do that, so why don't you challenge yourself to see if you can set the gap width between the bars to just 20%. So pause, see if you can shrink the gap width to 20%, resume, and if you didn't get that right, you can undo and follow along with us now. Just click on one bar that selects all the bars, then in the format pane to the right, select the icon with the columns in it. That'll let you format the data series. We see gap width in here, and we'll type 20 into that option, press return, and the change is made. Now here's another challenge to make sure that you're really acquiring these charting skills. Can you figure out how to flip the region order so the US and Canada is at the top of this chart instead of the bottom? And when you do this, can you also keep the numbers indicating the revenue on the bottom axis instead of switching to the top? And can you format the numbers in this axis so that they're in the currency format with no decimals? Well, we did the same thing with a column chart instead of the bar chart, but even though this is a bar chart, you should be able to figure out how to do this on your own. So why don't you pause, give this a shot, and if you got stuck, you can undo, and you can follow along with the solution right now. First, let's flip the order of those bars. To do that, we right-click on the vertical axis labels, we take a look at the options in here, and we select Format Axis, and then we'll head over to the Format pane on the right-hand side. We're in Axis Options. We see this icon with the columns in it is already selected for us. And remember, just like we did in the columns chart, we can head down to this area that says Axis Position Options, and we can select Categories in reverse order. And that flips the order so that the US and Canada are on top. But our horizontal axis is also at the top. Now, how do we push these numbers back to the bottom? Well, the option to do that is under Horizontal Axis Crosses, and it was called vertical axis crosses when we were working with the column charts because column charts are oriented with vertical lines. And remember, this is that tricky option where it's not very clear. I suggested memorizing the steps. Now you can try out these options in horizontal axis crosses, but just like before, the option we want is at maximum category. And when we click that, we see the axis with the numbers moves to the bottom. That's just what we wanted to achieve. Now, how about that number formatting? Well, we've got the number format option further down the formatting page, but we've still got the vertical axis selected, and we want to work with the horizontal axis. So let's select the horizontal axis. Now we can scroll down to the numbers option in the format pane on the right, and we can click to change the general format to currency format, and set the decimal box to 0, and now our axis is reformatted. But the font is a little too big, and the numbers look squished together. So to deal with this, we've got a few options. Now in the challenge, I didn't mention that you had to deal with this, but you already know two ways to solve this problem. One thing that we can do is we can resize our chart, and if we make room horizontally, this allows the numbers to spread out and it looks just fine. But what if we want to keep our chart the same size? Well, I'll undo the chart resize, and we can change the font for the axis values. Just click the numbers on the horizontal axis, head up to the home ribbon and adjust the font size. But here's something else that's new. Now you might have seen charts that have axis labels at an angle so that they're easier to read and they're not squished together. Well, we can do that here too. Look in the format pane on the right. Now the format axis icon is already selected. That's the third one from the left. That's this square icon with arrows pointing to the corners, and it's also got two lines representing the two different axes. And we see under alignment further down, there's a box for custom angle. So if we type a 45 in there and press return, we see the label shift at a 45-degree angle. Looking good. Want to change the orientation to the other direction? Just type in -45. That looks great too. Now you've just created a lot more room along your bottom axis, so you can even increase the font size so that these labels are easier to read. Maybe stretch out the table so that it's a little bit taller too. And our second bar chart looks lovely. Let's try another chart. This time, how about a pie chart? So we'll highlight the same data A2 through B6, we'll head to Insert, then Recommended Charts, and this time we'll select the pie chart. And I'll resize this chart, and again, be careful where you click and drag. If you're moving the chart, you want to make sure that you've selected the chart itself. I haven't done that here. I've selected a pie segment, and when I click and drag to the right, I actually explode the pie segments out. That's not at all what I want to do, but it's good to know that you can do this. I'll undo this, I'll click in the appropriate place, selecting the whole chart, and I'll reposition it in the upper right-hand corner. Now when you insert a chart, Excel puts you in the Chart Design ribbon. Now the center part of the ribbon shows a gallery of various predefined chart styles. Click this tab with a downward pointing arrow and it'll expose even more chart styles, and you can click on these and explore them. And once you select a style, like this blue background white chart, if you return to the Insert ribbon and select Recommended Charts, that chart style remains active even if you choose a different chart, like this bar chart here. But this looks pretty ghastly, so let's head back to the pie chart and return to our chart design ribbon. And why don't we select this chart style on the far left of the styles list, and then we'll head over to the quick layout options. If you click there, you'll keep the format style that you've selected, the colors, the fonts, and any background shading, but you can select different options for showing a different set of elements in the chart. For example, this one here that I'm about to click on is interesting because it shows the values as percentages, which is really neat because our numbers aren't entered as percentages. But if you choose this, Excel will automatically calculate those numbers as percentages for you and put them inside the pie slices of your chart. Now we always have full control over changing the elements in our chart, so I'll do some of that now. I don't want the chart title, so I'll click this and press the delete key to get rid of it. I'd also prefer the percentage labels that are inside of the pie slices to be in a bigger font, so I'll click one of the percentages. All the percentages are selected. I'll head to the home ribbon and I'll increase the font size. I'll also bold these values, and I can change the font color to white. That shows up better with the dark color background of these different pie slices. I'll also click the legend and increase the font size for everything inside the legend rectangle. So we have lots of options for additional customization. Now if I head back to quick layout, I can try out additional layout options, but be careful. If I choose this one in the upper left-hand corner, it looks like the percentage number for the rest of the world pie slice was deleted. Well, it's still there. Let me first click and delete the chart title so we have more room in here. And now you can see there's a thin black line that's heading from the pie chart. This is actually pointing to the call out of the number, and the number exists there. Excel has decided that the number that was inside of the pie slice would be more readable as a call out pulled outside of the pie slice. But since the percentages are in a white font and the background is white too, you can't see the white font and the white background in its new callout position. Now we can fix this by forcing all of the data labels to be displayed inside of the pie slices. So we can do this by heading back to the Chart Design tab, then we'll select Add Chart Element, we'll choose Data Labels, and we currently have Best Fit selected, but instead let's select Inside End, and we see the data label for our Rest of the World slice is now inside the end of that pie piece. Now we do notice that some of our text hangs out of this Rest of the World pie slice, and if we change the data label setting back to Best Fit, sometimes if we make our chart a little bit larger, there's enough space to display the callout back inside of the pie slice, so Excel will move the label back inside the slice. Unfortunately, that's not happening here, so I'm going to undo, I'm going to go back to my original chart size, and I'm going to change the data label setting back to Inside End. Now if I resize the chart now, that looks a little bit better, but I can also click on the data labels, then head to the Home tab and decrease the font size. And that looks good. Now let's try one more chart type, a combo chart. And this is a chart type that combines more than one data series, showing one series on one chart type and the other series in another chart type. So in this case, we're going to combine a column chart, which will show our revenues, with a line chart that will show the number of users. So let's select the data range from A2 through C6. This is the first time we use all the data for region, revenue, and users. Then we'll select the Insert ribbon, and we'll head to this icon here. That's the one that looks like a column chart with a line chart over top of it, and we'll click this. This is the one that will allow us to select a combo chart, and we see lots of different choices in here. Let's select this first one on the left, and Excel inserts a combo chart for us. But we'll change this quite a bit. First, our worksheet is getting a little crowded, so why don't we take this chart and move it into its own tabs so that it takes up the entire screen. And to do that, we'll just right-click on the chart, we'll select Move Chart, and in the Move Chart box, we'll select New Sheet. Then we'll give the sheet a name right in here, so why don't we call this Combo Chart? We'll press OK, and we see that the chart is now in its own sheet. We see the tab down below, and this tab is named Combo Chart. Let's click and drag that Combo Chart tab so that it's just to the right of the Facebook Data tab. And if you click back on the Facebook Data tab, we don't see the Combo Chart there anywhere. That whole chart was moved into its new tab. So let's head back to the Combo Chart tab, and let's improve the look of this chart. Now, one thing that we notice in our chart is that there's one horizontal axis scale, and the numbers on the left apply to both the revenues and the users. But the user numbers are smaller than the revenue numbers. So the line for the number of users really hugs the bottom of the chart. And these numbers are really referring to two separate things. The revenues columns are valued in US dollars, while the line represents the number of users. Now, one thing we can do to improve the look of this chart is we can create a secondary axis on the right, and we'll use that to represent the number of users. And if we set this to a different scale than the one on the left, then the differences in the number of users across the regions will be displayed in a way that's more reflective of the revenue differences across regions. So this is how we create our secondary axis. First, we're going to right-click on the line that we've plotted, and we'll select Format Data Series. Now, this is going to let us change the formatting for just the user data. That's the data that's represented by this line. Then over here on the right in our format pane, we see that Series Options is already selected, and we have a selection for Plot this series on a secondary axis. So let's select that, and oh, we see a new axis on the right, and this maxes out around 1200, and so our line is recalibrated because our highest value is in the Asian Pacific region. It's just over 1 billion, which is just over 1,000, but remember these numbers are valued in millions. And so because of this new secondary axis, our entire line moves up. The axis on the left is still there, and its top value is 35,000. Now remember, these are revenue figures that are also in millions, so 35,000 is really 35 billion. But that's close to the top of our highest revenue value, the US and Canada revenue figures. And by looking at this combo chart, we see in a single glance roughly how much bigger the US revenues are than the revenues in the rest of the world. But we also see how much larger those other regions are than the US in terms of the number of users. Very cool. Now, since the left axis, our primary axis, is showing revenues, let's format those in dollars. So we know how to do this. We'll just click the numbers on this axis, and we'll click on the Series Options icon in the Format Data Series box on the right-hand side. That's the icon that looks like a little column chart. And remember how to do this. We'll scroll down to the numbers grouping, and we'll click the little triangle there so that it's pointing downward, exposing all the different options for number formatting. And we can change the general number format to currency, and we can set our decimal places to 0, then press return, and take a look at the axis on the left, our primary axis. It's now formatted in dollars. Now, if you head back to the Facebook Data tab, you can see that these numbers don't have any formatting, so the formatting we just added is only specific to the chart. So let's head back to our combo chart, and let's update the chart title. Now, I can link the chart title back to anything in the original worksheet. So I'll just click on the chart title, I'll type an equal sign into the formula bar, then I'll click back on the Facebook Data tab, and if I click in cell A1 and press return, Excel jumps back to the chart, and I can see that the chart title is now Facebook 2019, which is the value that was inside of A1 on our Facebook Data tab. We just linked data across tabs. Nice! Now, in addition to updating the axis formatting, you can also add descriptive titles to these axes. So to do that, just head back to the Chart Design tab and select Add Chart Element, and select Axis Titles and Primary Vertical. And we see that this shows a vertically rotated label just to the left of the dollar values in our left axis, the primary axis. Now, the default text in here is Axis Title, but through the magic of Excel, even though this text is rotated on its side, you can still click in there and highlight the text. Now I'll select all of this text using the keyboard shortcut Command-A on the Mac. That should be Control-A on Windows. And as you type, the text will be rotated automatically at a 90-degree angle. So let's select all of this text and replace it with revenue and in parentheses MIL. Now let's add a title to the secondary axis to the right. And as I film this, I think I've come across a bug in the version of Excel that I'm using. So if I click on the rightmost axis and then head up to Add Chart Element and then select Axis Titles, Excel doesn't yet recognize that there's a secondary axis. I don't see that option in here. It should show a secondary axis right underneath the primary vertical entry here. Even selecting more axis title options didn't yield anything that was helpful. Now, as I explored how to fix this, I took a look inside Add Chart Element, I selected Axes, and then selected Secondary Horizontal. That added an axis that I didn't want at the top, but when I undid this, for some reason this forced Excel to think about the axes that it did have, and the next time I went into Add Chart Element and I looked inside of the axis titles, Excel now recognizes that I have a secondary axis, and I could select Secondary Vertical. Now, there's a good chance that by the time you're watching this video, this bug has been fixed, but with complex software, it's important to know that sometimes you run into bugs like this. Now, another thing that can be really helpful is to save your work, quit out of Excel, and then if you restart Excel and reload your file, oftentimes what this does is it clears the cobwebs out of Excel and it stops misbehaving. Now hopefully you don't have this problem, but either way, hopefully you can now select secondary vertical, and this should add the access title to the right of the user access to the right, and once you've got that access title in there, you can select the text inside it and replace it with users and in parentheses MIL. Now once again, we've covered a lot of ground in this video lesson. If you head back to the Facebook data tab, you can see that we created a clustered column chart, a clustered bar chart, a pie chart, all on the same screen, and we finished this off with a combo chart that took up its own screen, combining revenue and user data into a single combo chart made up of a column chart and a line chart. And we can click on the small X in the upper right hand corner of the format pane that'll hide the pane so that we can marvel at the majesty of your newly acquired Excel chart skills. Topics covered in this video included creating column charts, bar charts, pie charts, and combo charts, reversing column and bar order, moving axis values, formatting numbers on charts, working with chart elements that include data labels, titles, axis labels, and more, changing element color, inserting an image into a chart element, changing gap width, and setting labels at an angle, combo charts with a secondary axis, and we created charts on worksheets as well as a full screen chart. Excellent one. If there's a chart of your Excel skills, it's up and to the right. Keep at it, and be excellent to each other.